Hey everybody, Mr. Grove here. Today we're going to talk about the chordates. So the phylum Chordata, we have finally arrived to the phylum that you are in. And so all chordates possess these four characteristic traits: a notochord, pharyngeal slits, a dorsal nerve cord, and a postanal tail. Now with that being said, you only have one of those, and that's the postanal tail still. The others went away in your development into who you are. So they were embryological, but they went away. So the notochord kind of helped develop into the spinal cord, the dorsal nerve cord, the spinal nerve cords, and then the pharyngeal slits dissolved away as you developed your lungs. So the postanal tail, your tailbone, is really all you got left. But that is the four traits that all chordates possess. So we're going to go ahead. We finished with the two invertebrate chordates because they kept all of these things. And now we're ready for the vertebrates. So all of these are now going to be spinal column kinds of things. And so we'll start with the fish. And so phylum Chordata, and there are three classes of fish. The class Agnatha, which is the jawless fish. That's going to be our lampreys and hagfish, and so those are kind of interesting. We've got our Chondryicthes, and that's the cartilaginous fish, so that's the sharks, skates, and rays. And then we have the Ostyichthes. These are the bony fish. And so this is going to be kind of like what we would have with, pond fish and lake fish and river fish, things like that, and ocean fish. So key characteristics: fish have gills. And so that's how they're going to get their oxygen, by moving water over the gills. And so these gill tissues are very, very thin, high surface area, and so they can absorb a lot of oxygen and get rid of a lot of CO2. We also have what's called a single loop circulatory system. So it's one giant loop. That's going to be not as efficient as what you have, which is a double loop circulatory. So we'll kind of talk about that down the road a little bit. And then we also have this vertebral column. We have a backbone, a spinal cord, and so that's why we call fish vertebrates. And so this backbone protects that nerve, spinal cord nerve, and it also helps protect the brain. That, the skull is kind of part of that spinal cord system, and then it also allows for muscle attachment. And so, especially in fish, all those myomere muscles can attach to that and make a very powerful kind of tail swimming motion. So gills, they're going to have what's called a counter current flow. So when a fish opens its mouth, it moves water over to the gills. Now, it's important to note that the oxygen that a fish is getting is not the H2O oxygen. Okay, the oxygen is going to be this O2 that's dissolved in the water. And that's why, you have like an air stone or like a filter that moves water through the air in your aquarium or in a pond or something like that. And so this maximizes this for the fish in what's called a counter current flow. So blood is flowing one direction, and then the water with the oxygen is flowing the other direction. And so that mixes as much as possible. It's kind of like if you're driving along the interstate when you're going eastbound and you see the same kind of eastbound cars. A lot of times you'll pass the same car, be like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. But if you're going eastbound, the westbound cars, you see way more of them because they're constantly meeting you and passing. So that countercurrent flow maximizes the amount of oxygen that the gills can come in contact with. And more oxygen typically means more activity. Another thing is we now have kidneys, just like you. And so kidneys are very efficient. So if you're going to have a body that's about 70% water, water loss or water overgain could be a major problem. And so the kidneys and the nephrons are these tube-like units that help regulate the salt and the water balance. And so it removes the cellular metabolic waste through what's called urine. We kind of talked about that already. A little fun fact. So typically marine fish are going to urinate very little. Because think back to your osmosis days, water always goes towards the salty, sugary, solute substance. And so if you live in salt water, the water from you is always trying to get towards that salt. So it's constantly leaving your body, so you don't have to urinate the water out. But if you're in fresh water, that water is always trying to get into your cells, which is more salty and sugary. And so if water's constantly coming in, then you have to put water constantly out. And so to have an efficient water regulation system like kidneys is a big advantage for fish that are going to live in the water. Another thing about fish is reproduction. And so most fish are separate genders. So fertilization would be external. So outside the female's body. So sperm are released, eggs are released, the sperm swim towards the eggs. If you're a fisherman, you know this because you want to try and find those spawning beds. So these beds where the female fish will go to lay their eggs and the male fish know that. And so if you're the fisherman, that you can find those spots and dangle a hook with a worm close by, then you might catch them at the same time. After fertilization, we develop what's called a yolk sac. And so this yolk sac is a little attachment that has extra nutrients and food. And it gets used, that's like the backpack of food that the fish will have those first early days. Sadly, it gets used up quickly, and the success rate of fish surviving is not good, which is why we have a whole bunch of eggs that a female lays and a whole bunch of sperm that the males release. So it's kind of the mass numbers approach for fertilization. In sharks, rays, and skates, so that's going to be the Chondryicthes, there's what's called a clasper. And so the clasper is these two kind of organs here on the bottom of what we'd have as a shark, and they will help insert the sperm into the female for fertilization. So that's actually internal fertilization. And then they would be born live. So there's a few sharks that lay eggs, but that's kind of the exception to the rule. And so that is kind of spawning. A couple of your videos are going to deal with salmon spawning. And so those spawning runs that salmon do, they're getting back to those spawning beds that they know. Just kind of weird how they know that where they are. And they'll try and lay eggs, and then the male will release the sperm and hopefully have fertilization. So that's reproduction for the fish and fish in general. And I hope that was helpful.